joining us. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. We begin with what has been referred to as shocking news that Jacinda Arden is quitting as New Zealand's Prime Minister ahead of this year's election, saying she no longer has enough in the tank to lead. The announcement comes as polling indicates her Labour Party faces a difficult path to re-election on the 14th of October. Ms. Arden, 42, said she had taken time to consider her future over the summer break, hoping to find the heart and energy to go on in the role. But speaking to reporters, she said she unfortunately hasn't. Ms. Arden, holding back tears, said it had been a tough 5.5 years as Prime Minister and that she was only human and needed to step aside.
This summer, I had hoped to find a way to prepare not just for another year, but another term, because that is what this year requires. I have not been able to do that. And so today I'm announcing that I will not be seeking re-election and that my term as Prime Minister will conclude no later than the 7th of February. This has been the most fulfilling 5.5 years of my life, but it has also had its challenges. I know what this job takes, and I know that I no longer have enough in the tank to do it justice. It's that simple. I know there will be much discussion in the aftermath of this decision as to what the so-called real reason was. I can tell you that what I'm sharing today is it. The only interesting angle that you will find is that after going on 6 years of some big challenges, I am human. Politicians are human. We give all that we can for as long as we can, and then it's time. And for me, it's time. I think the cumulative challenges that we've faced as a team, and they have been extraordinary, has taken its toll. I consider this job a privilege, but I am also human, and so my reflection has been an entirely personal one. And I will add that I had the support of my family to continue.
Well, reactions have been trailing Ms. Jacinda's announcement, with former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark saying that it is a sad day for her country. Ms. Clark said as a woman who held the Arden's job from 1999 to 2008, she understands the pressures the position entails.
I was really sad when I woke up in Davos and heard about the resignation. Jacinda has done an incredible job for New Zealand. She's positioned us internationally. She's led us through significant crises in New Zealand. She's got a major economic and social policy legacy. It's a sad day for me to see her go. Every Prime Minister comes under pressure. You're at the top, and everyone's got an opinion. But in this 24/7 media cycle, social media, clickbait environment, the pressures are intense. And there was a level of vitriol directed at Jacinda that I've never, in my experience, seen directed at any other New Zealand politician. Jacinda led through significant crises. One was the major terrorist attack on peaceful people in the Christchurch mosques. The second was a major natural disaster which killed a number of people, including foreign tourists. And then COVID. And New Zealand government stepped up with one of the most effective responses in the world, and many of us are alive today because of that. My personal message is just a big hug, and to say spend the time with your family. There'll be new challenges ahead for Jacinda, and she'll step up to them.
Meanwhile, residents of Hamilton, New Zealand, Prime Minister Jacinda Arden's birthplace, were surprised and had mixed opinions to her resignation announcement earlier today. Miss Arden, 42, was born in Hamilton of New Zealand's North Island, but spent most of her youth in nearby Morrisonville and Marupara. Arden's empathetic leadership style was cemented by her response to the mass shootings at 2 mosques in Christchurch in 2019 that killed 51 people, injured 40, among other issues. A ruling New Zealand Labour Party vote for a new leader will take place Sunday, January the 22nd. The party leader will be Prime Minister until the next general election. Ms. Arden's term as leader will conclude no later than February 7, and the general election will be held on October 14.
I actually really liked her.
Yeah, and I think maybe she just had enough.
Yeah.
Like, enough of the bullshit.
But then, I guess.
Yeah.
I reckon she was doing good.
Yeah.
She had a whole COVID thing to cover.
COVID.
It's like, we all
The
come out real
mosque
good.
shooting. It was a lot.
She's done a lot for this country.
Yeah, definitely.
Overseas, she's definitely viewed very well, whereas I think internally, she's probably maybe lost the public's acceptance a little bit. I'd like to think her legacy will be her response to COVID and how well that showed everyone overseas how to do it, but hopefully it's not the sort of later end of these last year or so where it's kind of, you can kind of tell the public opinion's kind of shifted a little bit, so.
No, it was time for her to go, and no one in their right mind would have voted for her, surely.
Mixed emotions, because I really liked her at first, but right now there's like a lot of stuff about her, like, a lot of people talking about Jacinda, a lot of different opinions about her right now, of how she kind of dealt with a lot of stuff, but...
Jacinda's done a lot for our country, she's been put up, she's had to face a lot of drama and stress and strife.
I was neither surprised. I was a bit shocked. I was shocked that she threw in the towel a little, I kind of thought that she was going to be in it for the long haul. It was a shock, but I'm kind of glad.
A Prime Minister's job is stressful at the best of times, but New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern's time as leader was also marred by natural disasters, a pandemic, adding to the work stresses already on her plate. Well, this is according to an expert. He says clear boundaries, a cooperative workplace, the ability to switch off are essential to reducing workplace stress and burnout. It says all things that aren't always feasible as a Prime Minister. And this is coming from clinical psychologist Dr. Rachel Morihi.
Yeah, as I mentioned, there are three components of burnout. The first is emotional exhaustion. And what we're talking about there is a feeling that all your resources are depleted. And that's certainly the kind of thing that she's talking about. And right now she has no more to give. And I think it's important to note that it takes a long time for burnout. It takes a long period of time for burnout to occur. It's not something that we can fix overnight. It's not something you can go on a 2-week holiday and come back and feel completely replenished. I would not be surprised if any leader over the past 3 years coming out, whether it be a health leader or a politician, saying that they don't have anything left in the tank. Like I said, I think it's actually a fairly widespread feeling across the general population. So for those who have been in those positions of making a multitude of complex decisions in a time of such uncertainty, I'm not surprised at all to hear that some have gotten to the end of it and feel like they don't have much left in the tank.
Well, Mr. Nero Ugujabo, the former special advisor to former UK Prime Minister Theresa May, joins me now for more on the programme. Were you surprised by the news as many others?
No, I was very, very surprised indeed, because I think when you look across the world in a particularly challenging time for leaders, she stood out as a strong leader who was very focused on doing what was necessary to help her nation, particularly as has been said through a whole range of difficult times. So it was a bit of a shock to see her resigning.
Many wonder about the reason, though. Some have said that perhaps, we shouldn't talk about the fact that it was the pressure. Was it really the pressure of the job, or she felt perhaps another person who would come in her stead can actually do a better job? What do you think of the reasons?
So I was listening to her very intently, and I think we should take her at her words. And one of the key things she said was that she felt that at this particular time in the history of her nation, that she was perhaps not the best person to think about the next phase of development for her nation. And I think that's fair enough. We just have to accept that that's what she has put forward. And it's a very important quality of leadership that you're able to be self-reflective, you're able to look at around you and scan the issues and to be able to weigh your capacity to respond. And for her to say that she feels that she's not the right person right now, I think that's highly commendable. And you also have to play that in the background of many leaders across the world who are holding on to power, in many cases just for the sake of it, when they are demonstrably unfit for those positions. So see a senior person like this taking this decision so publicly, I think is very, very commendable.
Some others have mentioned, we also heard from a former New Zealand Prime Minister who talked about her being a woman and perhaps some of the many pressures of that, or that seat. Do you think this in any way had to do with her gender?
No, I think that's rather patronizing. I think women have proven to be extremely good leaders in so many different walks of life. And I think if you look at the last 10 years, and you're thinking about the great leaders in the world, and Angela Merkel of Germany, for example, would be a clear example of strong female leadership. Michelle Obama and her contribution, and of course, Jacinda, who was highly commended for the way in which she responded to the two big challenges that people have talked about. So the terrorist act, but also her response to COVID-19. I think she demonstrated very, very strong leadership qualities, have been commended all around the world. So I think to think her gender has had an influence, I don't think is quite right. In actual fact, she also referred to her family being very happy for her to continue, but that this was a personal decision, reflecting on what she has achieved so far and what else she could give to the nation. And just the feeling that someone else at this very stage can help to drive the agenda of the country forward. I think that's absolute quality leadership that will probably be cited in leadership books in the future.
I know that you've never been Prime Minister, but you've worked closely with one, and that's also a woman. What's the experience like?
I think it was fantastic working for Prime Minister Theresa May. And I think, again, in comparison to Jacinda and what she has set out, she was an individual who put the national interest first. And I think that is such a critical aspect of leaders who are leading nations, that you absolutely put the interests of your citizens, the interests of your nation first. And you can drive your personal agenda second, but ultimately the agenda of your political party or of yourself are not the priority. It is about the people. And I think when you look across our own continent to leaders who are struggling to hold on 30 years, 20 years, even when they are physically unfit to do the job, I think it's extraordinary to see some of these women really putting at the forefront the needs of their citizens and of their nation.
I guess it's also a call for more women, in government and, politics, essentially, in Africa as well. But one thing, you've mentioned the leadership styles and, things people should recognize and what people should learn from this, in New Zealand. But then another thing is identifying those qualities. How can people identify that this person promises development and, says loads of things that they will actually do for the betterment of such a country or community? And this is looking as some countries in Africa are, working towards planning an election that includes Nigeria as well. So how can people recognize the leaders that they really need?
Yeah, I think people have to judge not just what people say, but what they do. And in the context of Nigeria, I think we have to look back to the history of these candidates and absolutely determine whether or not they are people who have acted in the interest of the nation, because that gives us an indication of whether they're going to go on to work in the interest of Nigeria. And across Africa, I think we really need to go back to the drawing board in understanding what sorts of leaders we need in this century to drive our continent forward and to drive the individual nations forward. And in terms of whether or not women should come forward as leaders, I think I have the view that leaders can be groomed, can be shaped, and people can learn those skills. So we need as a nation to begin to think about ways in which we can build leaders of tomorrow, the way in which we can mentor people, the way in which existing leaders can support the next generation, and in building them all the sort of qualities and leadership skills that they need to carry forward that legacy of strong and good leadership. And as citizens, we have to really sharpen our weapons of understanding who is genuine and who is not. Unfortunately, our politics is plagued by individuals who are deeply self-interested, but we need to show that as people, we will only cast our vote for somebody who is interested in coming into power, not just for what they can get, but what they can give to the people.
We appreciate your time always on the programme. Mr. Nero Ugwujabo is a former special advisor to UK Prime Minister Theresa May. Thanks for joining me on the programme.
Thank you very much.
Now, that is the situation in France. Protesters who have marched across the country against unpopular government plans to reform the pension system, which could mean having to work longer in life. In Nice, southern France, workers from several unions marched in downtown. In western France, dockers, refinery workers joined the protests. Teachers, refinery workers were among those who walked off their jobs today in a nationwide day of strikes against government plans to raise the retirement age by 2 years to 64. The strikes and protests expected across the country are a major test for President Emmanuel Macron, who says his pension reform plan, which opinion polls show is hugely unpopular, is vital to ensure the system does not go bust.
Toi le sapeur-pompier, tu sais sauver des vies, ça rapporte pas d'oublier où soit pour venir. Toi le petit cheminot, tu sais.
Meanwhile, French metro and train drivers were among those who walked off their jobs as well in the nationwide day of strikes against government plans to raise the retirement age by 2 years to 64. The challenge for unions is to transform opposition to the reform and anger over a cost of living crisis into a mass social protest, which would eventually force the government to change tack. Public transport was severely disrupted. Only between 1 in 3 and 1 in 5 high-speed TGV lines were operating, with barely any local or regional trains running. Well, joining us right now from Paris is VOA's Lisa Bryant, and she joins me now. Lisa, good to see you. Talk to us about the situation today as the mass strikes began.
Well, to a certain extent, France just, slowed to a halt today. Many teachers were out. A lot of classrooms were shuttered. A lot of people were either, staying home or, walking to work. And when I got to the main protest in Paris, there were probably thousands of people. And say about 100,000 people are on the streets of Paris. We'll hear from what the police say, but, flights aren't, taking off. There is some metro service. I see you've got some of these images, but a lot of the trains weren't running and a lot of people were taking other measures. I biked around Paris and it was complicated, but there was not that much traffic. So I think a lot of people are staying home.
What has been government's reaction so far, and some of the union leaders?
Well, I mean, a lot of people are framing this as a standoff between, or a test for the government and the test for the unions. Will the unions be able to get out the numbers that they want? They say that there are more people out on the streets than they expected. We'll see what the police says. And usually, of course, there's this huge discrepancy in numbers. Will President Macron will be able to hold? He's tried to reform the pension system before. It didn't work. COVID then stood between it. The reform and reality. So he's trying again with the simpler method. People simply are going to work longer, according to him. But there was a previous government in 1995 that just didn't make it. They tried to reform the pension system, and that was a real blow to the prime minister at the time, Alain Juppé, and ultimately, helped pave the way. I mean, it just basically marked him and his political career at the time. So it's going to be tough on both sides, the unions and, of course, President Macron. But this is his second and last term. And so I think he's thinking, politically, this is the time to do it.
So tell us a bit more about that pension reform project. When does it begin? Why was it introduced in the first place?
Okay. So many governments have been trying to reform the pension system. They say, it's going to, they're going to be older people working longer. This is an issue that many governments around the world are facing, and it's going to, it's going to go broke, and there's got to be a way to pay for it. Right now, the French are retiring at the age of 62, which is very low, quite low compared to other parts of Europe. For example, Italy, 67, United States, 66. But so what the current government is saying is, hello, we're going to have to just get everybody to work longer. Before, Macron wanted to overhaul the system. It's very complicated, but it just wasn't going. And so now the idea is just more, retiring at 64 instead of currently 62. And what they're saying is more years rather than paying more into the system, which would also be unpopular. So that's the sort of the route that they're going to go. Meanwhile, the unions are, this is their first case, but they are promising more strikes to come, including a large protest, at least slated for the 21st of January. We'll see if that, again, if those numbers come out, the people come out on the street, and how long it will hold.
Thanks, Lisa. VOA's Lisa Bryant for us there in Paris. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Still to come on the program. You'll hear the account of one Russian student, how he fled Russia's draft, but now he's stranded in a South Korean airport. That's in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Still on industrial actions, but this time in the UK. Thousands of nurses at more than 55 NHS trusts in England are taking part in an industrial action for a second day this week. There's no end in sight to a wave of strikes that has piled pressure on the UK's overburdened National Health Service as nurses call for better pay and working conditions. Our London correspondent, Teniola Oyetayo, reports from the University College London.
Striking nurses brave freezing temperatures, chanting, "Collapse don't pay the bills," and no NHS cuts, with passing cars beeping their horns in support. Thousands of nurses across England are taking part in the two-day walkout as members of the Royal College of Nursing demand better pay and better working conditions.
The work conditions in our hospitals up and down the country are the worst they've ever been. My nursing colleagues have had a 20% pay cut since 2010. With the cost of living crisis, my nursing members no longer can actually go to work to do the job that they're trained to do. We are unable to attract young junior nurses into the profession because the work conditions are appalling.
In 2020, people across the UK took part in the weekly Clap for Carers campaign, saluting NHS staff working during the coronavirus pandemic. 3 years on, frontline health workers say they don't want applause, but a pay rise amid the cost of living crisis in the country.
People were clapping during the pandemic. We went through horrors during the pandemic. No one can, if you haven't lived it in a hospital, you don't know how it was. Collapse don't pay the bill. I think that sums it up.
The NHS is run on goodwill. I think you have to remember that everyone works over and above their hours because there's humans involved. So you never go home if you're needed. So the goodwill, it's on goodwill. But we're human at the same time, and we've been through so much, as has everyone. We've lost colleagues. We've come to work every day when everyone was at home. I would have loved to have been told, stay at home, but we came to work because we were needed, and we left our families, and people stayed near the hospital so that they didn't take COVID home. It's like enough is enough. I know that sounds stupid. It's been years and years, but this is it. I think the fact we're here, we haven't striked. We've never striked, and it's taken. No one wants to be here. We want to be looking after patients, but I think we're human and enough is enough. And I think this is the only way we can be listened to. And I don't know, it's so sad. It makes me want to cry. Like, we are so upset about it.
The nurses are demanding a pay increase of 5% above inflation, meaning a hike of 19%. The government says the demands are unaffordable. The NHS, which has provided healthcare free at the point of use since 1948, is under immense pressure with backlogs and understaffing. With over 40 years of experience as a registered nurse in the UK, Nigerian Juliana Adewuyi says the current situation is driving nurses to other countries.
NHS has been going down for the last couple of years that many of the nurses couldn't tolerate, and they've been going out to other countries, even including myself. I've been to Australia and I came back and the condition was even getting worse.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Keep our NHS alive.
Although the strikes have brought further disruption to the NHS, there's public support for the striking nurses.
I mean, the government's been reducing the standards of the NHS for years by not funding it properly, and now it's come to the kind of crunch point, right? So we need to support the nurses and the whole NHS against the government. The government needs to fund it better, which means funding nurses better. They have a really tough job. We don't support them enough. Clapping's not going to pay their bills, right?
You know, they've got to understand these people, you know, these professionals are, you know, basically saving people's lives, and they need to be credited for it. They're working very long hours, you know, they've got hardly time to see their families. And yeah, you know what? If it's just one day or you know, how many days they need to strike for someone up there, whoever it is, to take notice, then yeah, I'm for it.
Well, for now, it seems that the strikes will continue till further notice. As the RCN says, if no progress is made with the government by the end of this month, then the nurses will strike again on 2 days next month, with NHS leaders warning that it will be one of the biggest days of industrial action in the health service sector industry. From the University College London Hospital, Teniola Oetayo for Channels Television News.
Welcome back, and we're in Nepal, where grieving relatives of the victims of a deadly plane crash have received the bodies of the loved ones in Kathmandu. The bodies released included that of the pilot of the plane, Kamal KC, whose family performed last rites outside the Maharaj Gunj medical campus, where the autopsies were being conducted. Officials in Nepal yesterday had said there was no chance of finding any survivors of the country's deadliest plane crash in 30 years, but workers will continue to search for the remains of the last missing passenger. The bodies of 71 of the 72 people on board had been found. The Yeti Airlines ATR 72 turboprop crashed near the tourist city of Pokhara on Sunday morning, just before it was due to land. And China's growth is absolutely an opportunity rather than a challenge for the European Union and the two sides to strengthen mutual understanding and cooperation for common development. That's according to Mr. Fu Kong, head of the Chinese mission to the European Union, EU, in an interview with Thurko reporters. Arriving in Brussels in December 2022 to assume his new role, Mr. Fu said he is optimistic about the fundamental ties between China and the EU and the trend of strategic autonomy in Europe.
divided on certain issues, especially if you judge it from the public rhetorics. But actually, what gives me encouragement is that since I've come here, I said that I've talked to politicians, I've talked to officials, and actually, I'm quite encouraged by what they say privately to me. And they say that they will stick to the strategic autonomy, and there will be no decoupling between China and the EU, and they fully understand and respect China's position on issues like Ukrainian crisis and so on and so forth. The basic foundation between China and the EU are very good. And we just need to actually tap into this broad, vast reservoir of goodwill towards each other and mutual understanding towards each other. And that's an area that I think is an area that I want to concentrate my work on. We do not see Europe as a rival, much less an adversary. And we also hope that the EU can see China's growth as an opportunity rather than challenges.
Meanwhile, President of the World Economic Forum, WEF, has said that all countries around the world should work together to seek global solutions to reach prosperity and significant economic growth and avoidance of poverty and low employment rate. Under the theme of cooperation in a fragmented world, the World Economic Forum annual meeting opened Monday in Davos, Switzerland, and so far has focused on solutions, public-private cooperation to tackle the world's most pressing challenges.
This annual meeting is happening against a very complicated backdrop. Geopolitically, geoeconomically, maybe the most complicated backdrop in decades. But even in such a situation, we try to identify areas where we can collaborate. And there are areas we were very pleased when President Xi Jinping and President Biden came together at the G20 meeting in Bali and agreed to restart the discussions on, for example, climate change. It shows it is possible if the will is there and to build trust. There is, unfortunately, pessimism and cynicism out there. But if we don't collaborate on the global issues, we will not find global solutions. And that will cost the world a lot moving forward, be it climate change, be it nature, but also the fragmentation of the global economy. If we continue to impose new protectionist measures and tariffs, we will see much less growth in the future. And with less economic growth, there will be less prosperity, more poverty, and less jobs out there. And I hope we don't make a mistake to pursue such a road, because that is not very, very wise.
After COVID.
Well, we're back in China, where according to the World Wildlife Fund, about 1,800 pandas are left in the wild and another 500 in zoos around the world, mostly in China. Ahead of the Lunar New Year, they are a huge part of the celebrations. Here's more in this report.
10 panda cubs and their breeders came out to deliver their Lunar New Year wishes at the Wulong China Giant Panda Research Center in Sichuan Province. State media showed the fidgety group of cubs, all born in the year of 2022, playing with Lunar New Year decorations and climbing trees. According to the World Wildlife Fund, about 1,800 pandas are left in the wild and another 500 in zoos around the world, mostly in China. Still ahead of Lunar New Year celebrations, So, a Malaysian of Chinese descent has spent almost 40 years handcrafting heads for lion dance troupes across Malaysia, an art form prized by the ethnic Chinese minority in the country. A tradition originating in China, lion dances involve performers in costumes mimicking a lion's movements with the intention of bringing prosperity for the upcoming year. Even though the number of traditional lion head artisans has dwindled over the decades, with just 10 left in Malaysia and only 5 warehouses crafting the heads remaining, the artisan remains confident in the future of his craft.
It's just like when, for the older generations, if you wanted to learn Kung Fu or lion dance, you would have to go to China. Then you'll be able to learn that genuine craft that was passed down over generations. But that's not the case. Today, you can see a lot of overseas friends who are thinking about learning lion dance are coming to Malaysia.
Over the years, students from around the world have flown in over Seoul's teachings on the lion dance tradition. David Champeau, a French national based in Reunion Island, came to Selangor to learn from Seoul about lion dance while finishing his thesis. Back home, his community has its own lion dance group.
Hokksan lion dance style is the lion dance style we used in Reunion Island. So it was coming here was a good occasion to also learn about him and his own style of Hokksan lion dance. It's a really fierce style.
In the meantime, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres extended Spring Festival greetings to the people of China, expressing gratitude for China's strong partnership with the UN.
I'm pleased to send my warmest greetings as we enter the year of the rabbit. The rabbit is a symbol of energy and dexterity. These are qualities we need as humanity faces hardship and tests. I thank China for your strong partnership with the United Nations and support for international cooperation. By working together as a global community, we can advance peace, sustainable development, and a better world for all. In a spirit of hope and new beginnings, I wish you and your families good health, prosperity, and happiness in the Lunar New Year. Xie, xie.
The Spring Festival, known as the Chinese Lunar New Year, falls on January the 22nd this year. This year is the year of the rabbit on the Chinese lunar calendar of 12 zodiac animals.
And that's our program this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker. Bye for now.